What is going on, everyone? Today we are talking about two of Sony's most popular cameras for people who like to shoot a little bit of everything. And that is the Sony A7 IV and Sony A7R III. And we're going to be breaking down these cameras for wildlife photography, macro photography, landscape photography, and all intensive people photography, weddings, engagements, family photos. So why are we even comparing these two cameras? Well, I think that they sit in a great sweet spot. They are, mid-ranged cameras, and I know one's a little bit older than the other, but they're both very capable even now in 2025 and, in the coming years. And they'll both be sitting on the used market for, a pretty good price at this point. Now, I love both of these cameras, and I've shot on both of them for quite some time now. So the big question is it really worth the price difference to get the A7 IV, or should you be picking up the A7R III? I think it's really gonna depend on what you shoot. So first I'm gonna break down the similarities between the cameras, a little bit of the differences on a pretty high level. I know that there's tons of videos out there and you probably already know a lot about these specs. And then I'm gonna dive into the different types of photography and which camera I'd recommend to you depending on kind of what you shoot. So if you only, shoot one or two types of these photography, feel free to just follow the timestamps below. All right, so let's talk about the similarities first. Again, gonna keep this pretty high level. I know everyone out there probably knows a lot about these specs already, but just in case you don't, a couple of the similarities are that they're gonna share the same battery. They're both gonna have dual card slots. They're both gonna shoot 10 frames per second with a mechanical shutter in compressed RAW, and I pretty much only shoot in compressed RAW, to be honest. And they both have a 3.6 million dot EVF, so, on a high level, those are the similarities that I thought were important to point out, because these cameras are actually pretty different. So let's jump into those differences now. All right, first thing first, we're gonna talk about the year. So the Sony A7 IV came out in 2021, while the Sony A7R III came out in 2017. So of course the Sony A7 IV is newer, and everyone already knows that already. And with that comes a lot of great things. Now the price, of course, the biggest thing we should talk about is the price difference, because everyone knows the A7 IV is probably gonna be a better camera. It's newer, it's more expensive, but the price difference is not a whole lot. So the Sony A7 IV is gonna come in new right now for around 3,200 Canadian, which is around 22.85 USD. And on the used side, it's gonna depend, of course, on the deal, but I'd say roughly you're looking at around 2,500 Canadian, which is about 17.85 USD. On the flip side, the Sony A7R III is gonna be a little bit cheaper. It's gonna come in new at around 2,600 Canadian, which is around 1,800 USD. And on the used side, again, gonna depend on the deal, but likely looking somewhere in the ballpark of 1,900 Canadian, which is around 1,350 USD. So basically that means you're looking at around, $400 to $600 more to get the Sony A7 IV compared to the Sony A7R III. And, just think that that money could be used, for lenses or travel, right? So, it's still an important gap to think about, and think that that money could also be invested elsewhere into your kit. Now, looking at the shutter life of these two cameras, the Sony A7 IV is going to come in at 200,000 shutters, where the Sony A7R III is going to come in at 500,000 shutters. And basically, the shutter life is kind of like the mileage on a car. Sony thinks you can take 200,000 photos with the Sony A7 IV before, it kind of kicks the can and it will be done. But, of course, how you take care of your camera is also really important, and I've had a camera well past its shutter life, so but something to take into account, that the Sony A7R III will probably last you longer than the Sony A7 IV. So into the fun stuff now. We get an updated chip for the Sony A7 IV compared to the Sony A7R III, and that is going to do a lot of things for the camera, and we're going to get into a couple of these right now. But one of these things is an improved autofocus. Now, the Sony A7 IV is going to have a much better autofocusing system than the Sony A7R III. So like I said, I upgraded from the Sony A7R III to the Sony A7 IV, and that was a big reason that I did it. And it is really true. The autofocusing system is so much vastly better now. You get real-time tracking, which you did not get in the Sony A7R III. You also get bird IAF, which is also another function not in the R3. You will also have animal IAF and human IAF, which you'll find in both cameras, but all three of those are going to be drastically better in the Sony A7 IV. Of course, there is a megapixel difference as well. The A7 IV is looking at 33 megapixels, while the Sony A7R III will be looking at 42 megapixels. And we'll get into that a little bit more when I start breaking down the different genres of photography. But some people really love that 33 megapixel. I really like it myself. And some people actually buy the A7IV strictly because of that megapixel density. So, obviously you're getting 11 megapixels less, and that could be a pro or con depending on what you shoot, really. You're getting also enhanced ergonomics with the Sony A7IV. It is a bigger body. The button layout is much better. You get a flip out rotating screen, where with the A7R III, of course, it's a flip out screen. And some people like the flip out screen, some people like the flip up screen. To be honest, there's times where I really like the flip out screen, and there's sometimes where I kind of miss the flip up screen, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, I love the larger body and the increased grip size of the Sony A7IV compared to the R3. I think if you have really big hands, you're gonna like this, and you're gonna like it a lot. And if you have small hands, it's not gonna dissuade you at all. I think it's the perfect size. And also just the way that they've configured the buttons is so much better than the R3. So a big pro towards the A7IV for sure. Now, something super minor, but something I love so much with the Sony A7IV is that the little strap triangles, they no longer dangle. They're actually pretty tight on the cameras. So I don't always use straps, and one thing I hated with the R3 is that those little triangles kind of dangled all over the place. And same with the port doors as well. The doors are nice and tight. They open and close really nice, and they don't dangle like the Sony A7R III. When you kind of undid the doors, they just drop down and dangle. So really small thing, but really love that as well. And the last big difference between them, I'd say, before jumping into the different genres of photography here, is the enhanced video of the A7IV. Now, I will straight up say right now, if you are really interested in video, or you're a hybrid shooter, or you want to learn video and start putting that into your portfolio, the A7IV is well worth that upgrade. You're getting 4K downsampled from 7K, and that 4K is so nice. I am not the best in video. Really, I bought this camera to learn video, and I'm learning a lot. You also get 4K 60 with the Sony A7IV, whereas in the R3, you're only looking at 4K 30p, and that's obviously great for wildlife video and macro video. You're also getting 10-bit 422 with the A7IV, where you're only getting 8-bit with the R3, and of course you're getting S-Cinetone, which is great for me because I'm learning how to edit video, but you also get S-Log as well. So all these functions you don't get with the R3. The R3 is okay for video. I have shot a video with the R3, and it was fine. But for sure, the video functions on the A7IV are such a big upgrade from the R3. So if you are looking to do types of video or any video at all, then I would absolutely recommend the A7IV. And of course, those are bodies, the R3, the R4, the R5, they are more for photos and not really for videos. So really that should be no shock at all. All right, so let's jump into the genres of photography now, and I'm gonna recommend each camera based on the genre. And we're gonna start with my favorite one of all, and that would be wildlife photography. Now, one disclaimer, I have used the A7R III for a lot longer than I've used the A7IV. So that means I had a lot bigger of a pool to choose from for photos. So take that into account, that you might see some better photos from the A7R III. Now, when I think of a camera for wildlife photography, there's probably one thing that I'm interested in the most, and that would be autofocus. And of course, as you know, I already pointed out that the autofocus in the A7IV is vastly superior to the A7R III. It has bird eye AF, which the A7R III does not. And the animal IAF is just so much better on this camera compared to the R3. I almost never used the animal IAF, or I did, it was on, but it's not like it ever really worked that well. And if you look at my A7R III images, you may see one thing in common, and that is that all of my subjects are standing still. They are perched if they're birds, they might just be hanging out if they're mammals, and that is mainly because the A7R III is great when those types of wildlife are standing still, but as soon as they start moving, that autofocus will be hunting, and most of the time you're gonna get a blurry image. Doesn't mean that it's blurry all the time. Definitely have some photos of birds in flight, but this camera's autofocus just is not up to snuff when it comes to birds in flight or quick moving animals. So definitely something to take into account, and I'll just say it, the A7IV is the one here. I think it is totally worth you spending a little bit of extra money. I think it's absolutely worth the upgrade of that $400 to $600 if you have the money. You're gonna get a way better autofocusing system, and also you can use that bird eye AF and animal IAF in video as well. Now, of course, megapixels are important for wildlife, at least for me. I do like to have cameras with a little bit higher megapixels, And again, some people choose the A7 IV because they really want that 33. And I think for wildlife, I preferred the 42 megapixels more. It just gives you a little bit more cropping power compared to the 33. And I just live in an area where animals are typically pretty frightful of humans, so it's a little harder to get close. But I still love the 33. I think 33 is more than enough. Of course, if I had the choice between a camera that was the A7 IV all through and it had, 33 or 42, I'm going with 42, but I'm not mad about the 33 whatsoever. And of course, something to talk about with wildlife photography is noise. So typically with wildlife, you're gonna have a lot of grain in your images. You're gonna be using higher ISOs. So, I haven't really found too big of a difference between the low light capabilities. I would say the A7 IV is a little bit better with low light, of course, but the A7R III is going to have more detail when you start cropping with a lot of noise. So, they're close, and just with how good denoising software is these days, I just don't think low light is too big of a difference between them, and I don't think that really justifies a tick towards either camera. And on the topic of video, I think that this is such a great camera for wildlife video in this price range. And that 460 comes with a crop with the Sony A7 IV, and that's great for wildlife video because it just brings you a little bit closer to your wildlife. So again, I'm going A7 IV for wildlife all day. The A7R III is still a great camera for wildlife. It's going to be great for those perched wildlife, but as soon as I get in motion, it's going to be a little tough. And obviously you're getting 10 frames per second with either camera. And I think that's more than enough. Obviously, I wish we could have a little bit more, like 15. But again, these aren't dedicated wildlife cameras, so 10's not bad. All right, on to number 2, and that is macro photography. And I love to shoot macro. Macro is, again, one of my favorites, right up there with wildlife. And this is kind of one of those situations where I might say, it might not be worth it to upgrade from the A7R III to the A7 IV, or it might not be worth that price difference of $600. At least in my opinion, when it comes to macro, cameras kind of go towards the bottom for what you really need and what you should be spending a lot of your money on. I would say up there that's a lot more important is obviously a good macro lens, but also a good flash and a good diffuser. So it may be better for you to go with the A7R III and put that saved money towards something like a good diffuser. I have the Cinestick diffuser, and that is a game changer, and that was much more of a game changer than changing cameras. Also with the A7R III, you're looking at 11 more megapixels, so that's going to give you more cropping power and just increases your magnification. And again, the biggest difference here is autofocus, right? In my opinion. So in macro photography, you don't really need a camera with a lot of autofocus. Most of the time I'm shooting in manual focus anyways. So the biggest pro with the A7 IV isn't really the biggest factor when it comes to macro. Now, of course, if you're shooting macro video, A7 IV all day, because you're getting that 60p 4K with the crop. That crop's gonna give you more magnification. The 60 FPS is going to also let you slow down your footage, which is important for wildlife, but also really important for macro because bugs move so quickly. So again, if you're shooting video, A7 IV. But if you're just shooting photography, consider the A7R III. Again, the A7 IV is gonna be great for macro. It does macro just fine, but if you're shooting primarily macro, might not be worth it. Okay, on to landscapes. Now, landscapes is probably what I shoot the least, but I love shooting them when I can. I love going out and finding nice landscapes. And this might be another time where I say, I don't know, the A7R III could be worth it here. It might not be worth that increase of $600 to move up in camera bodies. Again, I just don't think the camera body is overly important for landscape photography. I'm not saying it's not important, but what's probably going to be a lot more important is finding good locations, traveling, having a diverse selection of lenses, that go from 16 millimeters maybe to 200 millimeters, and knowing a lot more about composition. I mean, composition is so important in landscape photography, so learning about that or spending money towards travel, I think is more important than having a nice camera body. And of course, thinking that you're going to get more megapixels with the R3, so it just gives you more detail in those images, lets you crop a little bit more. And of course, you're gonna get great images with the A7 IV if you use it for landscape photography. Not saying it's not a good landscape photography camera, but just might not be worth it for that increase in price. Although one thing to consider is that flippy rotating screen comes in handy for landscapes big time. Because if you're doing something like a vertical shot of a starry night, it's really nice to flip out that little screen and not kind of have to look down under the flipping the flip up screen, I should say. And if you also need to get kind of low and shoot vertically, then that flip out screen is really great. So if that flip out rotating screen is that important to you, then sure, go for it. And again, you're not going to be disappointed with the A7 IV for landscapes whatsoever. So when it comes to landscape, it's kind of hard. It depends what you've already got in your gear bag, and depends how much you really need that rotating screen. Okay, and on to the last bit of this video, and that would be humans, which I kind of just broadly categorize when I talk about weddings, engagement photos, family photos, portraits, and stuff like that. Now, this is a tough one because I think honestly both these cameras are going to do great for, human photography. I've used the A7RIII for a long time. I shot a lot of weddings and engagements with the A7RIII, and I do like the A7RIII, but I'm going A7 IV for people all day. And for me, right away, it's going to go back to the resolution. I think that 42 megapixels is great for wildlife and macro, but I don't really like it for people. I just think it's a little bit too much detail for people. Detail is great for wildlife, but with people, it can be a little unflattering sometimes. It will really keep like the hair on your body razor sharp, like maybe arm hair. Or neck hair. So I actually think it's a lot more pleasing to have lower megapixels. And I think 33 is great. I also like 24, like the A7 III, but I think 33 is just perfect for people. And that alone, I think, is worth the upgrade. But there's a lot more that goes into this. I mean, the autofocusing system is going to be better, and that's going to be important. Obviously, if you're shooting something like a wedding, having a better autofocusing system might save you sometimes. I do think that the R3 is going to have, just enough autofocusing capabilities for people anyways, and it's, more than good, but of course, you're going to take the increased autofocus if you can, right? The ergonomics is another big thing. I mean, when you're out shooting weddings for hours and almost the whole day, having that better ergonomics, having the buttons placed out better, having it a little bigger, fit better in your hand is going to make a world of a difference. And also having that better button layout is going to help you switch between your autofocusing modes or change things on the fly, which is pretty important when shooting people as well. Not to mention 42 megapixels just fills up your cards. Holy cow. When I shoot a wedding, I shoot way too many photos. And the 33 megapixels is just not going to fill up your card as much. And for me, that's pretty important. So yeah, just another pro towards that megapixel density. But of course, like anything, glass is so important when it comes to any of these types of photography, especially when it comes to humans for weddings and engagements. And any day I would take the A7R III over the A7 IV if it meant I had a better lens. I'd rather shoot with the A7R III and like a 35-1.4 than an A7 IV and a kit lens or something, right? So don't put all your budget towards the body. If you've got nice glass already, for sure that A7 IV is well worth it. But if you don't really have glass and instead you're putting all your budget towards the A7 IV, I consider doing the A7R III and putting that $600 into a good lens. And of course video, no difference here. Same as the other ones. If you're shooting any video for these people, if you're a hybrid shooter at all, you want the A7 IV. Okay, final verdict. Do I regret upgrading to the A7 IV? No, not at all. I love this camera. I do think it's better than the A7R III for sure. And, reflected in the price, everyone knows it's a better camera, but is it worth that extra dollar tag? Sometimes yes, I would say sometimes no. Again, depends what you shoot. And I hope that was clear enough in those descriptions before. Again, I should shoot so many things. I love to shoot wildlife. I like to shoot people. I like to shoot macro, landscapes. And again, either of these cameras are going to be great. And if you've got one or the other already, good job. You got a good camera. So thank you everyone for watching. I hope this helped you out a little bit. And if you like photography and if you like this video, click here.